Okay, so we're going to take this footage here off of Blackboard, and we're going to look at how to do a composite. Now, I had to go out and find some other footage, so I went over to Videvo and I just found some 1920 by 1080 resolution footage that I could put into the background behind her. And I've already got that downloaded. So I've got my soundtrack here from Jamendo, and I've got my 2 video files here. I'm going to hop into DaVinci, and I'm just going to take a look first at my media, drag that into a bin that I've created called video, and in my audio file folder, bin I should call it, I'm going to put my soundtrack in. All right, so I got my import done. Now, I'm going to hop on over to the edit page, and I'm going to show you some ways to optimize your workflow a little bit more today. Just to speed up the process after you've started to do visual effects, it can be pretty expensive on the computer when it's trying to think of how to composite footage. So anyway, first and foremost, I'm going to take the background layer and I'm going to drag it down to V1. So video layer 1, I want to have just the video. Oops, I made a mistake. Good to make mistakes when we're learning. I accidentally brought down the video and the audio. Even though there's no audio in it, I don't want to waste time unlinking it. So I'm just going to grab the footage up here and turn off the inspector so that I can see the footage in the preview pane on the left, and then I can grab the footage by itself with this little icon and drag this down to video 1. So now I have a background. And I'm going to grab my dancing subject and put her onto video 2. So we haven't looked at this aspect of DaVinci before. We've looked at media, we've looked at deliver, Fairlight a little bit, but this area here called color, this is the tool that where DaVinci Resolve evolved out of. It's one of the world's best, and still is one of the world's best, color correction systems. There's a lot of words that we might use like color correction, or you might have heard the word color grading. But when we take the time to finish our movies in post-production, we take a look at every shot through this lens, and we start to muck around with these different controls down here. And if you rewind back to what we were talking about earlier in the class, looky, 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 we got our reds, we got our greens, we got our blues, and then we've got our overall contrast or brightness, also known as your gamma. So this is a nodal system, so it's showing us the input off of our timeline to this footage here at this moment in time being outputted back to the timeline. So if I go back to my edit page, in order to get there, all I had to do is highlight this clip. This is what I want to work on. And then I click on color, and I get to see this clip in context. Now I get to see all of my clips over here. So if I wanted to do colorization to a lot of clips at the same time, I can do that. We also get to see our video track layers on top of one another, and we can scrub the timeline in here as well. So if we wanted to see what's going on, we can do some work. Now, back in the world of Photoshop, we were looking at this thing called the eyedropper, and really it's just a symbol that we use to help us to pick up something, pick up a color, choose or select a color. The eyedropper tool in Photoshop is called the qualifier tool in DaVinci. And I use that to get going. And I select that tool and I click on the area up here. Now we're not going to see anything really happen yet. We're making what's called a mask or a matte. So I select this I've accidentally from a previous test got this turned on plus. No, I want to use target. I want to use the picker. So we've got different settings down here, right? We'll look at these buttons really carefully. So this is like a little bullseye. So I want to be very accurate and select something to get going, this green color here. And we'll see in the node, this is going to be what's the influence. So this is what's currently selected. So if I wanted to, and this is really powerful, this is where DaVinci really shines. So if I started to change these values down here, it would only influence what I have currently selected in this alpha channel or this mask that I've created here. So if I'll just muck around and see what happens. You can see the color around her is changing. Now what's incredible about this system, watch what happens as I go down the timeline. Do you see what I see? It's intelligently finding those pixels and only changing the color of those things. I'm going to undo that. So by that rationale, if I chose to qualify only her lips, and you'll see, I'll look very carefully, I've just selected her lips, I could, in theory, just change her lipstick color. Now I would take some time to really refine that edge, but watch what happens when I scrub the timeline. It will, over time, discover those interesting moments. Undo. Let me qualify or select the background. Now if I look carefully here, I can see that there's a lot of information missing. The edges, for example, are not being selected because you look, there's a gradient, there's a fade from this light green to this dark green here. So that's why this exists in the tool set. There's delete certain colors out of the qualifier or add some stuff to it. So I want to pick or add this color up here in the corner. And you'll see the selection start to grow, the matte start to grow over here. Cool. But I still can't see the footage underneath. I've only selected this so that I could do manipulation of the footage that I currently am looking at on this layer, which is video layer 2. I need to produce an alpha channel. But to do that, I right-click and add an alpha output. And you'll see over here a little blue dot will pop up. That wasn't there before. So now I can drag this little node over here and Bob is your uncle. We can now see through to the background. But that's kind of crazy. It to me looks like an old TV show we used to have in Canada back in the 70s. Where Igor would come running out and dance in front of this green screen, and then they would go wild with it in terms of all the visual effects they would do. The Hideous House of Frankenstein, I think it was called. It was funny. Anyway, but it's all wrong, right? Like we're selecting the wrong stuff. We got to invert it somehow. Oh, thank you, DaVinci. We've got a little button there called invert. So we'll invert the mask. Woohoo! And stuff is starting to work. It's starting to look pretty good. But we've got all these things we often refer to as fireflies. So with all of the settings that we have down below, we can get rid of these flies. So these settings down here deal with the color that we're currently selecting or qualifying. So I can open up the green a little bit more. This should help. Just by grabbing the little up arrow there, and I can stretch this out, and that's extending the range of colors that we're choosing. Now this breaks completely if, say, she had any green on her shirt, because then it would select that as well. But you can see just by tweaking that a little bit, I'm starting to get rid of those little fireflies that are flying around in the background. Cool. Then we have this set of options over here that is your homework. This is where you're going to tweak and tweak and tweak to try to figure out the best settings. And I don't mind if you go out on the internet and look at some tutorials to try to figure out how to clean up this edge. How do you clean up this edge? Now I'm looking at this at 24%, so I'm actually going to zoom to 100 so I can actually see what the heck is going on here. Now, this is going to be a problem. This wire is going to be really hard because as we start to tweak the settings to get rid of the artifacts that are floating around out here, and we start to try to refine the edge closer to the subject, we're going to start to see as we feather this that this stuff's going to start to disappear. So we can't just flip a switch and have it magically do its job. In the real industry, somebody would literally take a paintbrush, a virtual little paintbrush, at this stage and start to paint away and composite, also known as rotoscoping. They would rotoscope out the green edge. But maybe for our purposes, we can get away with a lot simply by messing around with these settings. So first things first, we've got this blur radius. So as you saw before when I was working in Photoshop, we can blur that edge just a little bit and smooth that out. You'll see as I start to blur things that those little green specks that are still in the footage up there, in the background, they'll start to go away. So let me blur those out. Yeah, looking good. And I'm not seeing too much happen to the edge, but you got to be careful. That's why zooming in and out is super critical. But we're beginning to see the edge. Oh, but I'm losing the wire. I'm losing the wire. So I'm going to try to clean the blacks, do a pre-filter to the mask. Let me take the blur radius back down. The in and out ratio. And all we can do is tweak, tweak, tweak until we start to see the edge look really good. Really, really nice. We take pre-filter down, try clipping the blacks. So it's pretty amazing to think that somebody, every time we watch these movies, is literally doing this hard work to make these visual effects work in our favor. Let's mess around with the luminance and saturation. Not really helping us much. I'm going to go back in and do a selection of this green because there's still a lot of it here. I just pressed the add button. And then let me try using the feather plus button. We haven't played with that yet. Feather add. Oh, that's starting to look nice. When I use this button down here, the feather add, I can start to get really granular with how my settings are being applied. Oh, I've lost a chunk of head up here. So I'm going to take the blur radius, feather minus up here. Bring that saturation back. It's a process. It is a process. There's no doubt about it. Oh, I've lost the wire in here. Let me bring that back, get the clean black down, the clean white. Fun. Fun, fun. I've lost the wire. If I want to start again, I'm going to reset the node grade. Whoops. If at first it doesn't succeed, try again. I resetted the node grade, and I'm going to get busy. Select it, do the inverse. I'm going to try jumping in directly into my feather. See if that can help to start. I'm going to start using the plus feather tool. And you can scrub up and down the timeline while you're doing this. Plus green tool, plus masking. You press that and then keep going into it. Try to feather it out. And at some point, you're going to feel pretty satisfied with it. Now what I'm going to be doing as I mark this, I'll be stopping the footage from time to time to look to see whether or not is the wire still there. I'll just press pause. Oh, the wire's not there. So I need to go back and tweak the settings. And the thing is, it's non-destructive, meaning that the original footage is still intact. So if I go back into color, highlight the node, and start tweaking the grade, the composite, then I can eventually find, there we go. The wire came back. Let's go back to the footage. Take a look at that, my friends. Take a look at that. Do you see any problems with my composite?
Yeah.
What's that?
The wire is weird. And the other one is disappearing. The screen.
On her right side, there's still a lot of what is called spill. That's the green screen coming up onto the wire, onto her hair, onto the earphones. So we've got all of the power in the world inside of our tool here to start taking those tones out if we wanted to. But we have to be realistic here. When we put her onto the background, and it is nice from time to time just to look at the composite on a background that's, a color, a solid color. But once we put the rest of the scene in and there's a lot of noise, it's not actually really going to matter. Especially when I do this. Does it really matter when she is in motion? Does it really bother your eyes too much when she's in motion? Now, here's a trick. Uh-oh. What did I do? There we go. So, here's a trick. You grab your background. If it's don't have enough footage, you can duplicate it. The subject is in the foreground, so chances are when that edit happens, it's not actually going to look all that weird because we're looking at her and not really the background. So if you have to do that, go for it. The other thing you can do is, and I won't show you how to do this, you could reverse the frames and put them together. So all of a sudden the crowd will stop, they'll start dancing in the opposite direction, and then they'll stop and go in the other direction. Sometimes that works if you've got a big noisy scene in the background. We're always looking for efficiencies. Let's see if we notice that jarring moment. Can you pick up on the moment when it's like there's a blip in the scene? Not really. And the thing is, we are looking very carefully at the shot right now. If we showed this to a buddy, they wouldn't know. If we showed this to a friend, they wouldn't know. Right? So, when you're finished with this, and I do want to have some titles and it fading in, it's kind of frustrating when you fade in your footage like this and this, because the background, look how creepy this is. Right? Well, that's not good. So what I could try to do is fade in both at the same time, but that looks weird too. That doesn't work. So watch this powerful trick. We've got all this footage stacked on top of each other. Oops, I didn't want this audio. I'm going to unlink, delete, and then immediately turn my linking back on because I don't want to unlink anything else. And check this powerful tip out. If they're stacked on top of each other, you can select all three of these or all four of these clips, right-click, and say, give me a new compound clip. And what it does is it smashes it all down, and we'll call this, my composite. Can I spell any day now? My composite. And it just crushed it down onto what looks to be one new clip. And what's great is watch what happens when I fade it in. It treats it like a new rendered clip that beautifully fades in. It's awesome. Last but not least, let's throw that audio in. Now she's already grooving. So maybe I'll add a little bit of a head to this. The music I can see doesn't really start jamming till here. So maybe the intro would be a good time for some titles. And I do really appreciate the time you're putting into your titles, my friends. Your videos are looking awesome. We'll just throw this in here. And if I want, you know, I don't have to be totally perfect with my, true to my music. I can slip this all back. I can slip my soundtrack back. Just cut it. Put it back like that. Because I really want the groove to start when that drop happens. And I can see the drop where it gets loud because the waveform's nice and big. I'm going to slip that over. I'm going to fade this in. Make a slight fade for her. Change my titles. Composite. Getting jiggy with it. Fade them in. Do your diligence. Cut the audio back. Fade her out. Fade the audio out with a little tail. We should have a video, my friends. Let's give it a look. Now, because it's running through it the first time, it's rendering. So we got to rewind, watch it again, let the system render the frames. Refine that edit. She takes a moment there to put her headphones on. I don't really like that. Maybe I'll start there. Ripple delete that in. Cool beans. And save this as assignment 5 composite with dancing subject.